There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And this word of transfiguration, that's where we get our English word metamorphosis. And so now you got these disciples, and they're fully awake. And in the other Gospels, it says that they were afraid. And if you've ever noticed in the Gospels, Jesus is always taking Peter, James, and John with him to these different places where he doesn't take all the other disciples. Jesus had taken these 3 disciples into that house and the healing of Jairus' daughter when he brought her back from the dead. And these are the same 3 that Jesus will take with him to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane before his crucifixion. If you notice, every time Jesus takes these guys to go pray, they always fall asleep. So we're kind of in good company. A lot of times when I start talking, everybody starts getting a little drowsy, start falling asleep. It's okay. But the reason I think he took these guys with him, it's not so much that he had to keep an eye on these guys, but I believe that he considered these 3 to be his close friends, that Jesus actually enjoyed their company and he enjoyed the time that he spent with them. And so now they're awake and they see Jesus in all his glory. And now Jesus is talking to these 2 other guys that didn't come up the mountain with them. And they recognize these guys. And it's Moses and Elijah. And we don't know how they recognized them, but maybe Jesus was calling them Mo and Eli or something. So you have to realize that Moses, he hadn't lived on earth now for about 1,400 years. And Elijah, he hasn't been around for over 900 years. And people will tell you the reason that it was Moses and that it was Elijah is because Moses, he represented the law, and Elijah, he represented the prophets. And we've been seeing this whole time with Jesus and the Pharisees that they've been fighting, and they've been trying to cause this division between Moses and the law and Jesus. But now they're talking, and we don't see any division between them here. In fact, you see them kind of getting along quite well. And so with these 2 together, Moses and Elijah, here at the Transfiguration, many people believe that these 2 will be those prophets that will appear during the Great Tribulation in the book of Revelation, the ones that are killed in the sight of the whole world. And the thing is that these 2 prophets, they do the same types of signs that Moses and Elijah did when they were in their own ministries on earth, where they would shut up the skies and they'd cause the water to turn into blood. And so they're also there, they're shining. In one of the Gospels says that they're also in glory. And they're not there to talk to the disciples, but in Luke 9:31, it tells us why they are there and what they're talking about with Jesus. And it says they're talking about Jesus's departure. And that word for departure there in Greek is the word exodus. So it's the same word used for the Jews when they left Egypt. And so now they're talking about Jesus's death and his exodus that's soon to occur in Jerusalem. And that's what death is for us too as believers. It's just a departure. It's just an exodus. It's our exodus of our bondage in this earth to this new life in the glory of heaven. And Peter, when he describes his soon coming death, his departure, he uses that same exact word. He uses that word exodus in his New Testament letter. So there's another reason in my mind that I think it was Moses and Elijah that came to speak with Jesus. Because I think and I believe that just like how Peter, James, and John were Jesus' close friends, I believe Moses and Elijah were also close friends of his. Because when you read about Moses and how he met with God every day in the tabernacle, we're told that God spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And we see that same kind of relationship where God spoke plainly to Elijah in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. And I'm going to guess that they probably, before Jesus became a man, they spoke together often. And I really like this idea where Jesus considers us his friends, that Jesus, he not only loves us, but he likes us, and that he enjoys the time he spends with us. And so he's not only our God and Savior, but even with all our flaws, he considers us his friends. We have these kind of relationships in our own wives, in our own family relationships. Rebecca, she's my wife, but sometimes she's also my friend. And it's the same with my children, and it's the same with my mom. And so now Jesus, he starts speaking about his impending death with Moses and Elijah. And so this proves to us that Jesus' suffering and his death will not be an accident. And so now Peter, he's fully awake and he's afraid. And then he's seeing that Moses and Elijah, that they're departing. And Peter, he doesn't want this mountaintop experience to end. And so Peter interrupts. And in Mark's and Luke's gospel, we're told that Peter, he didn't know what he was saying. So he's a little overcome by seeing all this. And so he's thinking that maybe he should say something to keep things going on. And I understand this because I say stupid things all the time where I should just keep my mouth shut. And Peter says, it's good for us to be here. Well, I don't really know if it was good for Peter to be there, but I'm going to guess it was. Jesus did bring him along. And then Peter says, if you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And a tabernacle is a tent. That's the common word for a tent. But sometimes it refers to these shelters that they make out of branches. And so what Peter's wanting to do here is he's thinking if he can make these shelters for these guys, they can stay there and they can spend the night. And we're told that Peter was going to keep on speaking, but God the Father, he interrupts Peter. And that's pretty bad when God himself has to stop you because you're saying things that are just so foolish. And so now you have God here and he's speaking from behind a cloud. And that's because they can see God's presence and live because God is so much greater, so much power. He's described as being a consuming fire. And just by seeing Jesus in his glory, they were already afraid. And that's what always happens when anybody sees Jesus in his glorified state. We see that with the Apostle John in Revelation. When he sees Jesus in his glorified state, he fell down like a dead man. And so now God speaks, and it's terrifying. And it's not because of what he says, but it's because of his great power. Did you guys hear the thunder last night? 4:30. It was really loud, and it lasted for a really long time because I wasn't even going to say anything about it. But that's how God's voice is described. It's described like thunder or like roaring water. And when it describes God's voice, it says that it breaks the cedars in Lebanon and it causes deers to give birth. So his voice is really, really powerful. But all God said here was the same exact thing that he spoke at Jesus' baptism. He said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." And then he just adds, "Listen to him." Or where it says here, it says, "Hear him." So God, he didn't say anything scary. It's just his voice that's terrifying because it's like thunder or like roaring water. And what Peter got in trouble for here is not that he wanted this experience to continue on and to go on for a while, but it was that he's putting Jesus on an equal level as Moses and Elijah. That was his mistake because Moses and Elijah, they're just men like we are. They're just people. And so now they're all laying there and they're thinking that they're going to die, but then everything just goes right back to normal. And Jesus just comes behind him and touches him, and he's not mad at all. And he tells them not to be afraid. So I take from that God didn't speak to scare them, but it was to correct them. Because the truth is that Peter was right, that it was good for him to be there. And so Jesus tells them on the way down not to tell anybody about the vision until he's risen from the dead. And so now we hear that this is a vision, but this is a vision that they all three saw. And this is something that they will never forget, because we'll see that Peter and John, they both write about this event, about beholding Jesus's glory. James, he didn't write anything. We have no writings from him, but that might be because he was also the first apostle that was martyred after Jesus's resurrection. And so now they're all coming down off the mountain, and they had just seen Elijah. So naturally, they've got questions about him because they've been taught things in the scriptures, and they don't really quite understand how this all works together. Because they were taught that Elijah would come first to prepare and establish the kingdom. And you can find that in Malachi chapter 4. And so they're wondering if this appearance of Elijah, if that is this fulfillment of prophecy. And then Jesus, he gives them a two-part answer. And his answer really doesn't make it any clearer for us, because Jesus does say that Elijah, he will come first, and that he will restore all things, like it says in Malachi. And so right here, Jesus, he's talking about the future. And that's kind of where we get that idea of Elijah being one of those two witnesses that we read about in the book of Revelation. And Moses also, because they both appeared at the transfiguration. So a lot of people believe it will be Elijah and Moses, because like we said, they do perform the same kind of miracles that they did during their ministries. You know, the shutting up the heavens and turning the water into blood. But then Jesus, he goes on and he says, Elijah's already come, but nobody knew him. And the disciples here, they know that he's talking about John the Baptist. And this is the second time Jesus has said something like this about John the Baptist, about him being Elijah. Because the first time we read it in Matthew chapter 11. And this can be confusing because we don't understand how people can live more than one time. And no one has ever explained this to us, because we do know that we don't believe in reincarnation. And even when John the Baptist, when he was asked directly, he says, "Are you Elijah?" He said really clearly, he says, "I am not." And people will try to explain this to you about John the Baptist came in the power of Elijah. But I'm really not sure about that. I leave this category alone in the things that I don't know, into the things that I don't understand. And I am okay with that, because I can believe things that I can't understand, and I can still believe they're true, especially when Jesus says them. And so Jesus tells these three that just like John the Baptist suffered at their hands, that he would also be suffering at the hands of these men. And so now they're down from the mountain, because we never live in our mountaintop experiences.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.